She grabbed my hair, shoved me against the counter, and torched my diary right there in the sink, watching the ink turn to ash. She smiled and told me that without that book, nobody would ever believe a single word I said. But here is the thing, she forgot about living with a data security expert. I never keep just one copy, and tonight, 20 years of her perfect reputation is going to burn brighter than those pages ever did. My name is Sloan Mercer. If you are watching this, it is probably because the algorithm pushed it into your feed between a makeup tutorial and a cat video. Or maybe someone sent it to you with a caption like, "You have to hear this." I am sitting here in my apartment in Denver, 28 floors up. The city lights are bleeding through the glass behind me, a smear of gold and electric blue against the black sky. It is quiet here, the kind of quiet that costs $3,000 a month. But if you look closely, past the expensive view and the carefully curated minimalist furniture, you might see the yellowish-green stain on my collarbone. It is fading now, just a ghost of a bruise, but it aches when it rains. I want to ask you a question, a real question. Have you ever been hit by a family member, shoved hard enough that the breath left your lungs in a violent whoosh, only to have them stand over you and burn the only proof you ever had of their cruelty? Have you ever watched the paper curl and blacken in a stainless steel sink while they told you that it was just a small family dispute? That is what happened to me 4 days ago. Let me take you back to that moment for a second. I am not talking about when I was a child. This was not a helpless little girl getting pushed around. This was 2 adult women in a kitchen in Ohio. My stepmother, Valerie, had her hand wrapped in my hair. She slammed me back against the granite counter, the edge of it digging into my hip, and then she shoved me down toward the floor. I remember the sound of the lighter. It was a cheap plastic thing, the kind you buy at a gas station for $2. Click, whoosh. She threw my diary into the sink. It was a thick, leather-bound book, the pages heavy with ink. She held the flame to the corner of a page, and I watched the fire catch. It moved fast, eating the paper, turning 15 years of my life into gray ash. She looked down at me, her face flushed but her hair still perfectly sprayed into place, and she smiled. It was a small, tight smile. She said that without that book, nobody would ever believe a single word I said. She said I was hysterical. She said I was making things up. She said it was time to let go of my delusions. And I screamed. God, I screamed so loud my throat felt like it was bleeding. I scrambled on the tile floor, reaching for the sink, sobbing, begging her to stop. I acted like my entire world was disintegrating in that basin. I let my father, who was sitting in the other room pretending to watch the news, hear the sheer terror in my voice. I let Valerie see the absolute devastation in my eyes as the final page turned to cinder. But here is the secret I have been keeping for 4 days. Here is the hook that I need you to understand before we go any further. I did not scream because I lost my evidence. I screamed because I had to sell the performance. I screamed because if she thought for 1 second that I was not destroyed, she might have kept looking. You see, Valerie thinks she knows me. She thinks I am still that quiet, mousy girl who grew up in the shadow of her perfect biological daughter. She thinks I am just Sloan, the one who moved away to Denver to work with computers, the one who never quite fit into the picture-perfect Mercer family portrait. She does not know what I actually do for a living. I am the director of data security for Lighthouse Nexus Labs. We manage logistics data for some of the biggest supply chains in the country. My entire career, my entire adult life, is built on a single, unshakable principle: redundancy. In my world, if you have 1 copy of a file, you have 0 copies. If data exists in only 1 physical location, it is already lost. We build fail-safes upon fail-safes. We assume the server room will catch fire. We assume the flood will come. We assume the hacker will get in. And we prepare. So, when I went back to Cedar Heights last week, I did not just bring a leather notebook. That diary she burned? It was real. Yes, it contained handwriting and dates and emotions, but it was just paper. Carbon and wood pulp. What Valerie burned was 15 years of observation, It was a log of every single time she siphoned money from my father's accounts. It was a record of every check she wrote to a charity that did not exist. It was a transcript of every manipulative whisper she used to isolate my father from his friends, his family, and eventually, his own sanity. It detailed the timeline of how she climbed the social ladder of our small town, stepping on necks with her sensible heels, all while playing the role of the saintly church lady. She thought she was destroying the only record of her sins. She thought fire cleanses everything. But I scanned every single page of that diary before I even got on the plane. And I did not just scan it, I indexed it, I tagged it, I cross-referenced her handwritten notes with bank statements I pulled from the dark web and public property records. I built a database of her life that is more detailed than her own memory. When she lit that fire, she did not know that there is a server rack in a climate-controlled basement in Denver, humming with the encrypted backup of her destruction. She did not know that there is a cloud redundancy scattered across 3 different continents, and she definitely did not know about the third copy. The third copy is my favorite. You see, digital data is great, but sometimes you need something physical, something tangible that you can hold in your hand, something that cannot be hacked, only found. I knew I was walking into a war zone when I went home. I knew she would come for my laptop or my phone if things got bad, so I brought a backup that she would never suspect, a physical drive, military-grade encryption, hidden inside an object so mundane, so wrapped up in her own ego and her own narrative of perfection, that she actually thanked me for bringing it into the house. It is hidden in the one place she thinks is the safest spot on earth. It is right under her nose, in the very heart of the kingdom she built for herself, and she has no idea. So why am I making this video? Why am I telling you this now? Because the statute of limitations on being a victim has run out. I am done being the stepdaughter who gets pushed into counters. I am done being the one who leaves the room when she walks in. Tonight, I am not just a data security expert, I am a storyteller. And I am going to tell you the story of how the Mercer family burns, not with a lighter and some gas, but with the truth. If you listen to the end, you will understand why sometimes, to survive, you have to turn your trauma into a weapon. You have to take the ugly, messy, painful parts of your life and crystallize them into something hard and sharp. You have to wait. You have to be patient. You have to let them think they have won, right up until the moment the ground opens up beneath their feet. My bruise is fading, but the data is forever. But to understand how we got to that kitchen, to understand why a 30-year-old woman would need a dossier on her own mother figure, we have to go back. We have to leave this high-rise in Denver. We have to go back to where the silence started. We have to go back to Cedar Heights, Ohio. Back to a town where the lawns are manicured to within an inch of their lives, and the church bells ring every hour on the hour. Back to a time before I knew what a backup server was. Back to when I was just a girl who thought that if I was quiet enough and good enough, maybe, just maybe, I would be allowed to stay in the picture. It starts not with fire, but with a funeral, and a woman in a black dress who walked into our lives and started rewriting our history, one erased sentence at a time. Cedar Heights, Ohio, is the kind of place that people from the coast write movies about without ever actually visiting. It is a town built on the aesthetic of morality. We have the white steeple of the First Baptist Church, piercing the blue sky like a warning finger. We have the Autumn Harvest Festival, where men in flannel shirts sell pumpkins and women in knitted scarves sell apple butter. It is a place where everyone knows your license plate number, but nobody asks why you were parked in front of the liquor store at 10 in the morning. Growing up, I believed the town was the entire world. My father, Daniel Mercer, was the manager of the local branch of First National, in Cedar Heights. That made us royalty, or something close to it. He was a good man, or at least, he wanted to be. He was the guy who approved small business loans on a handshake because he knew your grandfather. He was soft-spoken, wore gray suits that always smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. And he loved my mother with a quiet, desperate intensity that I only understood years later. My mother died when I was 9 years old. It wasn't a tragedy of violence or scandal. It was just a slow, cruel failure of biology, a heart condition that took her piece by piece until the house, which used to be cluttered with half-read books and unfinished knitting projects, went silent. For 6 months, it was just Dad and me. We lived in a kind of functional grief. The house was messy, there were dishes in the sink and dust bunnies in the corners, but there was air to breathe. Then came Valerie. She didn't storm into our lives. She seeped in, like damp rising in a basement. She appeared 2 weeks after the funeral with a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil and a sympathy card signed with calligraphy so precise it looked like a font. She was a widow from the next town over, a woman who wore pearls on Tuesdays and spoke in a voice that sounded like she was constantly soothing a frightened animal. The church ladies loved her. They told my father she was a godsend. They told him a man in his position needed a partner, and a girl of my age needed a mother figure. They were wrong about the mother part. Valerie didn't want to be a mother. She wanted to be a curator. When she married my father a year later, the transformation of the Mercer household began. It wasn't sudden. She didn't throw out my mother's things immediately. Instead, she organized them away. The cozy, cluttered living room was purged. The mismatched throw pillows were replaced with beige ones that we weren't allowed to touch. The stack of magazines on the coffee table was replaced by a decorative bowl of ceramic fruit. Valerie was obsessed with order, not just cleanliness, but the appearance of moral rectitude through geometry. Shoes had to be aligned perfectly in the foyer. Coats had to be hung by color, and I, Sloane Mercer, had to be flattened out to fit into this new, sharp-edged world. There was no yelling. That is the thing people don't understand about control. It doesn't always sound like a scream. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper. Valerie would walk into a room where I was reading and gently close my book, telling me that reading in the afternoon was a sign of laziness when the silver needed polishing. She never hit me. She never locked me in a closet. She just slowly, methodically, stripped away my right to take up space. Then, Kayla was born. If I was the rough draft, Kayla was the final print. She was blonde, bubbly, and performed exactly as required. With Kayla's arrival, Valerie's tableau was complete. She had the respected banker husband, the angelic baby, and the stepdaughter who could be useful in the background. I became the ghost in my own house. I remember the Sunday mornings the most vividly, in Cedar Heights. Church wasn't optional. It was a runway show for the righteous. Valerie would spend an hour dressing Kayla in lace and velvet, curling her hair into perfect golden ringlets. For me, she would go to the discount rack at the department store 3 towns over. She bought me clothes that were 2 sizes too big, in shades of mud brown or graying navy. Modesty is a virtue. Sloane, she would say, smoothing down a collar that scratched my neck. We don't want you attracting the wrong kind of attention. You don't have Kayla's brightness. She would say it with a smile, a sad little tilt of her head, as if it were a tragedy we both had to accept that I was born dull and unlovable. We would walk into the church, and Valerie would link her arm through my father's, beaming at the congregation. She was the perfect wife, the perfect mother. She baked the best pies for the bake sale. She organized the charity drive. She would push Kayla forward to wave at the pastor, and I would stand 3 feet behind them, holding the diaper bag, holding Valerie's purse, holding the door. People would stop us and coo over Kayla. "Oh, Valerie, she looks just like an angel," they would say. Then they would glance at me. "And Sloane, you're getting so tall, so helpful." "Sloane is my rock," Valerie would say, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt as cold and heavy as a stone. I don't know what I would do without her help around the house. She prefers to stay in the background. Don't you, dear? She's very shy. I wasn't shy. I was silenced. But if I tried to speak, if I tried to say, "I got an A on my math test," or "I wrote a poem," Valerie would laugh, a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. "Oh, Sloane, honey," she would say, looking at the other adults with a conspiratorial wink. "Let's not interrupt the grown-ups with our little stories. You know how you tend to exaggerate." That was her favorite weapon. The idea that I was sensitive or dramatic if I cried because she forgot to pick me up from school for 3 hours, leaving me sitting on the curb in the rain. She would tell my father I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding if I pointed out that she had replaced the photo of my biological mother on the mantel with a framed certificate of her own charity work. She would sigh and tell me I was being cruel to bring up the past when she was trying so hard to build a future for us. "You have such a dark imagination, Sloane," she would tell me in the kitchen, while she was cutting vegetables with a knife that flashed under the fluorescent lights. "It worries your father. We have to protect him from your moods." Protect him. That was the key. She framed my erasure as an act of love for my father. If I complained, I was hurting him. If I fought back, I was ungrateful. If I wanted to be seen, I was selfish. So I learned the lesson that every child in a house like that learns eventually. Emotions are dangerous. Feelings are liability. To survive, you don't fight the current. You become a stone at the bottom of the river. You let the water rush over you and you don't move. You speak less. You think less. You show nothing. But the human mind is not designed to hold that much silence. It needs a release valve. It happened when I was 12 years old. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember the date because it was my birthday, and nobody had mentioned it all day. Valerie had hosted a bridge club meeting in the living room, and I had spent the afternoon serving iced tea and tiny cucumber sandwiches to women who looked through me as if I were a piece of furniture. When they left, Valerie handed me the tray of leftover crusts and told me to clear up. She didn't say happy birthday. My father came home late, tired and distracted, and Valerie ushered him into the dining room for a serious talk about the budget, closing the door in my face. I walked up the stairs to the attic. My room was technically on the second floor, but the attic was the only place Valerie never went because she was afraid of spiders and the dust ruining her clothes. It was cold up there, smelling of fiberglass insulation and old cedar. I sat down on a trunk that contained my biological mother's old college textbooks, one of the few things Valerie hadn't thrown away, probably because she didn't know they were there. I was shivering, not just from the cold, but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning a hole in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run downstairs and smash the ceramic fruit bowl. I wanted to shake my father until he woke up and saw that his wife was slowly erasing his daughter. But I knew I couldn't. If I screamed, I lost. If I acted out, I proved her right. I was the emotional one. I was the problem. I saw an old notebook lying on top of the trunk. It was a promotional item from the bank, bound in fake black leather with the First National logo stamped in gold on the corner. The pages were blank, creamy, and inviting. I pulled a pen from my pocket. It was a cheap blue ballpoint I had found in the kitchen drawer. My hand shook as I opened the cover. I felt like I was doing something illegal, something dangerous. In that house, having a private thought was an act of rebellion. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink didn't flow at first, so I scratched a few circles until a jagged blue line appeared. Then, I wrote. I didn't write Dear Diary. That felt too soft, too much like the little girl Valerie wanted everyone to think I was. I wrote a sentence that felt like an anchor dropping into the ocean, holding me in place so I wouldn't drift away entirely. If no one believes me, at least the paper will. I looked at the words. They were real. They existed outside of my head. Valerie couldn't smile them away. She couldn't call them an exaggeration. They were evidence. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a witness, and a witness has a job to do. I turned the page, and I began to write down everything. The bridge club, the missed birthday, the way Valerie had looked at me when I dropped a spoon, a look of pure, unadulterated loathing that vanished the second my father walked in the room. I wrote it all down, and as the ink filled the page, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a recorder, and one day, the recording would be played back. The transformation of the diary happened gradually. In the beginning, the pages were filled with the messy, sprawling handwriting of a 12-year-old trying to process grief. I wrote about how much I missed my mother's voice or how cold the house felt even when the heating was on. But as the months turned into years, and my understanding of the Mercer household deepened, the ink began to change, the loops became tighter, the paragraphs shortened, the emotions were stripped away, replaced by cold, hard observation. I stopped writing about how I felt and started writing about what I saw. It became a nightly ritual. I would wait until the house was silent, until I heard the heavy rhythmic snoring of my father and the soft classical music Valerie played to help herself sleep. Then, I would pull the notebook from beneath the loose floorboard I had pried open under my bed. I treated it like a shift report. I created columns: date, time, location, subject, incident. I didn't know it then, but I was training myself for my future career. I was learning that in a chaotic system, data is the only thing that holds the truth still long enough for you to look at it. There was a dinner in the spring of my 14th year that perfectly illustrates why I needed this structure. We were eating pot roast. The air in the dining room was thick with the smell of gravy and the tension that always hovered over us when Valerie was in a mood. Kayla, who was 5 at the time, was playing with a porcelain serving bowl. It was an antique, something Valerie had bought at an estate sale to prove we had history. I was sitting across from them, eating silently, keeping my eyes on my plate. I knew the rules. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Kayla swung her arm, a wide, careless arc of a child's gesture, and her hand connected with the bowl. It spun off the table and shattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was explosive, like a gunshot in a library. Gravy splattered across the pristine baseboards. For a second, there was total silence. Kayla's eyes went wide, tears welling up before she even let out a sound. Valerie didn't look at Kayla. She didn't check to see if the child was cut. Her head snapped toward me with the precision of a striking cobra. "Why were you not watching her?" Valerie hissed. I blinked, my fork halfway to my mouth. "I was eating dinner. She is sitting next to you." "Do not talk back to me, Sloane," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register. "You are the older sister. You saw her playing with it. You knew it was dangerous. You let this happen because you are jealous of her. You wanted her to get in trouble." I looked at my father. He was chewing a piece of carrot. He looked at the broken porcelain, then at his plate, and finally, he took a sip of water. He did not say. "Valerie, she is sitting 3 feet away." He did not say. "It was an accident." He just swallowed and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Clean this up," Valerie ordered me. "And don't expect dessert. Carelessness has consequences." That night, I did not cry. I went upstairs, opened my notebook, and wrote. Date, April 12th. Time, 6:35 in the evening. Location, dining room. Incident, subject, Kayla broke antique bowl. Subject Valerie assigned blame to subject Sloane, citing negligence despite proximity. Subject father observed event and remained nonverbal. Outcome, punishment assigned to innocent party. Note, pattern of transferred culpability is increasing. Writing it down in that sterile, clinical language gave me a sense of power. It wasn't just a bad memory anymore. It was a logged event. It was evidence for a trial that was constantly running in the back of my mind. By the time I reached high school, the leather notebook was nearly full, and my paranoia was growing. I had started reading about digital security, fueled by a used laptop I had bought from a senior for $50. It was a brick of a machine, heavy and slow, but it was my gateway to a world Valerie didn't understand. I learned about encryption. I learned that a file on a desktop is like leaving a diary on a coffee table, but a file buried inside a system folder, password protected and disguised as a driver update, is a fortress. I began to type. I transcribed every page of the handwritten diary into text files. I spent hours in the library or late at night in my room, the blue glow of the screen illuminating my face as I immortalized the injustice. I created 2 worlds, the physical one in the notebook, which I still kept because there was power in the ink, and the digital one, which lived on a flash drive I wore on a chain around my neck, tucked under my shirt. As I digitized the data, I started noticing trends I had missed in the moment. When you view 10 years of behavior on a spreadsheet, the anomalies jump out at you. The biggest anomaly was money. Valerie was always making my father sign things. It usually happened in the morning, when he was rushing to get to the bank, his mind on interest rates and loan approvals. She would slide a stack of papers across the granite island along with his coffee. "Just a few things for the church charity drive. Daniel," she would say lightly, "and the transfer for the education fund. We want to make sure the girls are set." But she never said the girls when she read the fine print. She only said it in the summary. I started paying attention to the mail. I would get home from school before Valerie, sift through the envelopes, and steam open the bank statements before resealing them. I saw withdrawals that didn't make sense, checks written to community outreach organizations that, when I Googled them, had no website, no phone number, and a PAO box in a town 2 hours away. And there was the name, Kayla Marie Mercer. It appeared on savings bonds, on trust deeds, on life insurance beneficiaries. My name, Sloan, was nowhere. It wasn't just that I was being excluded, it was that I was being financially ghosted. The turning point, the moment I started using a red pen in my physical diary to mark critical intelligence, came during my junior year. I was homesick with the flu, or at least, I was pretending to be. I was lying on the couch in the den, covered in a blanket. When the doorbell rang, it was Pastor Miller. He was a tall man with a smile that showed too many teeth and a handshake that lingered too long. Valerie ushered him into the sunroom. Just around the corner from the den, she thought I was asleep upstairs. She didn't know I was holding my breath, pressing my ear against the cool drywall. "The audit is coming up next month, Valerie," the pastor said. His voice wasn't booming like it was on Sundays. It was low, nervous. "Don't worry about the audit, Tom." Valerie's voice was soothing, confident. "The funds are diversified. We moved the latest batch into the trust. As long as it is in a minor's name, the oversight committee can't touch it without a warrant, and they won't get a warrant for a grieving family's nest egg." "And Daniel?" the pastor asked. "He doesn't ask questions?" Valerie laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Daniel trusts me implicitly. He thinks he is investing in his legacy. Besides, if anything happens, everything is under Kayla's umbrella. It is untouchable. It is safe." "And the other one?" the pastor asked. "The stepdaughter?" "Sloan?" Valerie's tone shifted to dismissal. "Sloan is irrelevant. She will turn 18 and leave. She is not part of the equation." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought they would hear it. Money laundering, or fraud, or embezzlement. I didn't know the exact legal term yet, but I knew they were hiding money, and they were using my little sister's identity to do it. I crawled back up the stairs, silent as a shadow. I pulled out the notebook. I grabbed the red pen. Date, October 14th. Time, 2:15 in the afternoon. Witness, Sloan. Subjects, Valerie and Pastor Miller. Topic, anonymous funds and concealment of assets. Quote, "It is in a minor's name. Sloan is irrelevant." Analysis. Subject, Valerie is using subject Kayla as a shield for illicit financial activity involving the church. To the rest of Cedar Heights, I was just the quiet Mercer girl, the one who always had her nose in a book. The teachers praised my focus. The neighbors called me introverted. They saw a girl escaping reality through fantasy novels. They were wrong. I wasn't reading fantasy. I was reading books on forensic accounting. I was reading manuals on code. I was studying. I didn't have a plan to take them down. Not yet. At 16, you don't think about destroying your family. You think about surviving them. The diary wasn't a sword. It was a shield. It was the only thing that proved I wasn't the crazy, jealous, sensitive girl Valerie painted me to be. It proved that the gaslighting was real. That night, after writing the entry in red, I did something I hadn't done before. I bought a small padlock for the drawer of my nightstand. It was flimsy, something a hairpin could pick, but it was symbolic. I locked the diary inside. I touched the cold metal of the key and whispered to the empty room, a promise that would take more than a decade to keep. "One day," I said to the silence, "if they try to tell the world that I made this up, if they try to tell me that I am insane, I will open this, and I will make them read every single word." I didn't know then that fire would be their method of choice. I didn't know that paper burns at 451 degrees, but I knew that the truth, once recorded, is harder to kill than a person. And I had backups. The letter came in a thick, cream-colored envelope that looked out of place on our hallway table, resting innocently between a Pottery Barn catalog and a utility bill. I opened it, standing right there in the foyer, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a prisoner who just found a loose bar in the cell window. Acceptance, Redwood Institute of Technology, full scholarship. When I announced it at dinner, Valerie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a tight, practiced expression, the kind she wore when a neighbor bought a car nicer than ours. She told me she was proud. Of course, she said it was wonderful that I had found a school that catered to my specific, solitary interests, but then she sighed, a long, tragic exhale that signaled the conversation was about to pivot. She said she worried about me being so far away. She asked who would help with the spring cleaning now. She wondered aloud if a technical school was really the place for a young lady to find a husband. Not that she expected me to prioritize that sort of thing given my personality. My father was different. He looked at the letter with genuine relief, perhaps because he saw my exit as one less source of tension in the house. But when I brought up the cost of room and board, the only things the scholarship didn't cover, he suddenly found the grain of the oak table fascinating. He cleared his throat and told me that things were tight. He said the market was volatile. He said that with Kayla approaching her teenage years, the family had to prioritize keeping the college fund liquid for her. I didn't argue. I didn't point out the new SUV in the driveway or the renovation plans for the master bath. I just nodded. I had been saving every dollar I made from tutoring math and babysitting for 3 years. I had enough for a bus ticket and the first month's deposit on a dorm room. I left Cedar Heights on a gray Tuesday morning in August. I packed 2 suitcases. One held my clothes, mostly the drab things Valerie had approved of. The other held my life, my laptop, my external hard drives, and buried deep within a stack of textbooks, the leather-bound diary. Valerie hugged me at the door. She smelled of lavender and control. She whispered in my ear that I should remember where I came from, and that I shouldn't let the city change me. I think she meant she hoped I wouldn't stop being afraid of her. I didn't look back as the bus pulled onto the highway. Redwood Institute of Technology was not a pretty campus. It was a collection of brutalist concrete buildings in a city that always smelled like wet asphalt and ozone. It was beautiful, for the first time in 18 years. I walked into a room and nobody looked at me with disappointment. My life shifted into a gear I didn't know I had. I entered survival mode. The scholarship covered tuition, but I needed to eat, and I needed equipment. I took a job at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, working the opening shift from 4 in the morning until 8. I learned to sleep in 3-hour bursts. I learned that day-old bagels taste fine if you toast them long enough. I also started a side hustle fixing laptops for rich freshmen who spilled beer on their keyboards. I became known in the dorms as the ghost in the machine. You dropped your laptop? Go see Sloan. She doesn't talk much, but she can retrieve data from a fried hard drive in 20 minutes. That was when my education really began. The classes were fine, teaching me syntax and network architecture, but my real degree came from the way I lived. I began to see the world entirely through the lens of security. I wrote scripts to automate my budget because I couldn't afford a single rounding error. I built a server in my closet from scavenged parts to host my own private cloud. I adopted the religion of the backup. The rule is simple: 3 copies of data, on 2 different media, with 1 offsite. 1 copy on my laptop, 1 copy on an external drive hidden in a hollowed-out biology textbook. 1 copy encrypted and uploaded to a server I rented in Iceland using Bitcoin. I mined on the dorm electricity. The diary changed too. I still wrote in it, but the tone shifted. I stopped recording just the events and started analyzing the source code of the abuse. I took psychology electives and applied the theories to Valerie. I dissected her behavior like malware. I realized she wasn't just mean, she was a classic narcissist with Machiavellian tendencies. I wrote essays in that diary about power dynamics. I mapped out the flow of information in the Mercer household. Valerie controlled the input, what the neighbors saw, what my father heard, and she strictly regulated the output, my silence. Kayla's perfection. I realized that my family was just a corrupt database, and Valerie was the system administrator with root access. But even 1,000 miles away, the connection wasn't severed. Valerie called every Sunday night. It was a ritual I couldn't break. I would stare at the phone, my stomach twisting, before answering with a neutral hello. She never asked about my classes. She never asked if I was eating enough or if I had made friends. The calls were the Kayla show. Kayla made the cheerleading squad. Kayla won the essay contest. Kayla was volunteering at the animal shelter, and the local paper did a feature on her compassion. Then came the guilt. Valerie would lower her voice and tell me that my father was looking older. She would say he missed me, though he never came to the phone. She would say it was a shame I was too busy to come home for Thanksgiving, implying that my absence was a calculated insult to the family that raised me. Family is the most important thing. Sloane, she would say. You will learn that one day when you are alone. She wanted me to be lonely. She needed me to fail so I would have to come crawling back. One night in my junior year, my roommate, a graphic design major named Jenna, found me staring at the wall after one of these calls. We had been drinking cheap wine out of mugs, celebrating the end of midterms. Jenna was blunt. She had purple hair and a family that actually liked each other. She watched me put the phone down, my hands shaking slightly. "Why do you do that?" she asked. "Do what?" I said. "Let her talk to you like that. You are the smartest person I know. You can hack into the campus dining system to check the menu before they post it. You are literally a genius. So why do you let some housewife in Ohio treat you like a servant who went AWOL?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, to say it was complicated, to say that she was still my stepmother, but the words died in my throat. "I don't know," I said. "It is because you still think you owe them something," Jenna said, pouring more wine. "You think if you are good enough, they will finally give you a gold star, but they won't. Sloane, the bank is closed." The comment hit me harder than a physical blow. The bank is closed. I realized then that I was still trapped in the loop. I was physically in a dorm room, but mentally, I was still waiting for permission to exist. I was still terrified of being the bad daughter, the ungrateful child. I decided then that I was done waiting for the gold star. I was going to build my own galaxy. I threw myself into my work with a terrifying focus. I stopped just fixing laptops and started building security protocols. I interned at a firm that handled banking software and found 3 zero-day vulnerabilities in my first week. By the time I graduated, I didn't walk across the stage looking for my parents in the crowd. I didn't invite them. I told them tickets were limited, and I gave mine to Jenna and the guy who ran the coffee shop where I worked. I had 3 job offers before I even had my diploma in hand. One was from a government agency, one was from a massive bank in New York, and one was from a startup in Denver called Lighthouse Nexus Labs. The bank offered the most money, the government offered the most stability, but Lighthouse offered me a blank slate. They were building a new kind of logistics network, one that relied on absolute data integrity to move medical supplies and high-value cargo. They needed someone who was paranoid. They needed someone who assumed that every system was compromised and that every person was a potential leak. I interviewed with the CEO, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He asked me what my philosophy on security was. I looked him in the eye and said, "Trust is a vulnerability. Verification is the only reality. And if you don't have 3 copies, you don't have anything." He hired me on the spot. I packed my life again. This time, I didn't have to choose between clothes and books. I hired movers. I bought a car. I drove west, watching the landscape change from the flat grays of the Midwest to the rolling plains, and finally, the jagged, majestic teeth of the Rockies. Denver was high and bright and open, The air was thin, but it felt clean. I rented the apartment on the 28th floor not because it was luxurious, but because it was a fortress, keycard access, 24-hour doorman. No one could walk up to my door with a casserole and a demand. I started at Lighthouse Nexus Labs on a Monday. I wore a tailored suit that cost more than my father's car. I walked into a glass-walled conference room and introduced myself as the new director of data security. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow. I was the wall. I was the person who decided what got in and what stayed out. But even as I built my new life, even as I filled my bank account and secured my servers, I kept the diary, I kept the digital backups, and I kept the old, battered laptop from college. Because deep down, beneath the layers of encryption and the expensive suit, the 12-year-old girl in the attic was still whispering. She knew that monsters don't stay under the bed forever. Eventually, they come looking for you, and when they did, I intended to be the one holding the match. Success in corporate America has a specific smell. It smells like ozone from server racks, cold brew coffee, and the faint, chemically clean scent of new money. At Lighthouse Nexus Labs, I breathed that air for 5 years. I climbed the ladder not by stepping on people, but by building systems that made everyone else look safer. I went from a senior engineer to the director of data security in 18 months. My job was to design the digital vaults for supply chains that moved everything from insulin to iPhones. I built leak prevention protocols for retail giants and encrypted communication channels for hospital networks. I became the person CEOs called when they were afraid of what was in the dark. With the title came the rewards. My salary didn't just double, it multiplied. I had stock options that vested into a portfolio that would have made my father's head spin. I bought the condo in downtown Denver, the one with the view that made me feel like I was floating above the world. But the first thing I bought wasn't a car or a designer bag, it was a dining table. It was a slab of reclaimed walnut, 10 feet long, heavy and dark, and scarred with history. I bought 8 chairs to go with it. They were all identical, high-backed, upholstered in gray linen, with the exact same cushioning. There was no head of the table, there was no children's seat, there was no hierarchy in my dining room. If you sat at my table, you were equal. It was a small rebellion, a piece of furniture that whispered, "No one is invisible here." Despite the boardroom meetings and the business trips to Seattle and San Francisco, the old habit never died. I still kept the log. I didn't carry a leather notebook anymore. I had built a private application, a secure journaling interface that sat on my phone and laptop. Disguised as a weather app, it required a fingerprint and a 20-character password to open. Every entry was encrypted with AES 256 before it even hit the local storage, then sharded and dispersed to 3 different cloud servers under dummy accounts. I wrote about my team. I wrote about the politics of the C-suite. And inevitably, I wrote about the calls from Ohio. They were infrequent now. Valerie had realized that I wasn't going to crawl back for money, so her power over me had shifted from financial to emotional. She called only when she had a victory to parade. Kayla has been chosen as the face of the Hope for the Heartland campaign. She told me one Tuesday morning while I was reviewing a penetration test report. Her voice was tinny over the speakerphone. The church is expanding the outreach program. We bought the old mill property to turn into a community center. It is a huge undertaking, but you know how good I am at managing resources. I typed while she talked. Date, March 3rd. Subject, Valerie. Topic, property acquisition. Note, the old mill has been condemned for a decade. Purchase price likely inflated. It is all thanks to careful planning, she continued. If we hadn't been so prudent with the family accounts all these years, none of this would be possible. Kayla is so grateful for the stability we provided. That was the sting. The we, as if I hadn't been wearing Goodwill sneakers while Kayla got private tennis lessons. But as I listened, the forensic accountant in my brain started waking up. Cedar Heights was a town of 5,000 people. The church was active, yes, but it wasn't a mega church. Yet, Valerie was talking about buying real estate, launching marketing campaigns, and funding anonymous shelters that nobody seemed to know the address of. I started doing some digging, not legally. I couldn't subpoena their records, but publicly. I pulled the church's 990 tax forms, which are public for nonprofits. They were vague. Miscellaneous expenses, in the six figures. Consulting fees paid to LLCs with generic names like Blue Sky Management and River Valley Holdings. I ran those LLC names through a business registry database. They were registered to PMEO, boxes in towns where Valerie had friends from her old life. It didn't add up. The math was messy. It looked less like charity and more like a spin cycle. I noted it all in the app. Potential embezzlement structure. Shell companies linked to Social Circle. Then the call came. It was a Thursday. I was standing in the break room, watching the espresso machine drip, thinking about a vulnerability in a client's firewall. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Cedar Heights area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I assumed it was a telemarketer or maybe someone looking for a donation, but something, maybe the instinct that kept me alive in that house for 18 years, made me answer. Ms. Mercer? A woman's voice, tired, professional. This is Brenda from Cedar Heights Memorial. I am calling about your father, Daniel. My stomach dropped. What happened? He has had a stroke, Ms. Mercer. It appears to be a TIA, a mini-stroke, but there are complications with his blood pressure. He is stable, but confused. We need a family member here to make some decisions about his care plan. Is his wife there? I asked. Valerie? Mrs. Mercer was here, Brenda said, her voice tightening slightly. She left about an hour ago. She said she had an urgent meeting with the contractors at the church site. She left your number and said to call you if we needed someone to sign the paperwork. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. When the spotlight was on, Valerie was the saint. When the actual work of caretaking began, she had a meeting. And Kayla? I asked. I haven't seen a daughter, Brenda said. I hung up and called Valerie, straight to voicemail. Then I got a text. 30 seconds later. Kayla is in Chicago for her art installation. She can't be disturbed. I am handling a crisis with the foundation. If you still consider yourself part of this family, you will come home and handle your father. He is asking for you. It was the "he is asking for you" that did it. It was the hook, the bait, and the sinker all in one. I walked into my boss's office 10 minutes later. I need a week, I said. Family emergency. He looked at my face, saw the color gone from my cheeks, and didn't ask a single question. Go, take 2. We will hold the fort. I went home and packed. But this wasn't like packing for a business trip. I packed my primary laptop, a matte black machine with biometric locks. I packed 3 encrypted hard drives. I packed a portable Wi-Fi hotspot because I didn't trust the network in my father's house. And then I went to my safe. I took out a printed copy of my logs from the last 5 years, a condensed version, focusing on the financial discrepancies I had tracked. I put it in a waterproof folder. I stood in my living room, looking at the city view one last time. I felt a strange vibration in my chest, a low-frequency hum of danger. I wasn't just going to visit a sick parent. I was walking back into the lion's den, and the lion was hungry. The flight was a blur. The rental car drive from the airport to Cedar Heights felt like traveling back in time. The highway turned into a 2-lane road. The skyscrapers turned into cornfields, then strip malls, then the familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood. I drove past the Welcome to Cedar Heights sign. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling slightly on the bottom edge. I drove through downtown. The First Baptist Church loomed large, its white paint gleaming aggressively in the afternoon sun. There was a massive banner draped across the front pillars. Hope for the Heartland, directed by Valerie Mercer, A Legacy of Giving. Her face was on the poster. It was a glamour shot, airbrushed to perfection, her smile benevolent and serene. But as I stopped at the red light in front of the church, I noticed something. 2 women were walking past the poster. They stopped, looked at Valerie's face, and exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of admiration, One of them leaned in and whispered something, and the other rolled her eyes and shook her head. The light turned green. I pressed the gas. The veneer was cracking. I could feel it. Valerie had built a monument to herself. But monuments are heavy, and the ground in Cedar Heights was shifting. I wasn't just coming home to sign medical forms. I was coming home to see what was underneath the cracks, and I had brought my own sledgehammer, just in case. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room was the first thing to hit me, sharp and chemical, cutting through the illusion of normalcy I had been trying to maintain since I drove past the city limits. My father, Daniel Mercer, looked smaller than I remembered. He was propped up against a mountain of white pillows, his skin the color of old parchment. The stroke had been minor, the doctor said, a warning shot across the bow, but it had taken something vital from him. The confident banker who could calculate compound interest in his head was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes darted toward the door every time a nurse walked past. I sat in the plastic chair next to his bed, holding his hand. It felt frail, the bones prominent under the skin. "She made me sign them. Sloan," he whispered. His voice was a dry rattle. "She said it was for the insurance. She said if I didn't sign, the hospital would take the house." "Who, Dad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Valerie?" He nodded, a jerky motion that seemed to cost him effort. "The papers, on the table. She told me not to show you." I looked at the bedside table. Underneath a box of tissues and an untouched cup of red Jell-O was a manila folder. I opened it, my training kicking in. I wasn't a daughter looking at her father's estate. I was an auditor looking for the leak. It was a masterclass in financial dismantling, durable power of attorney, transfer on death deeds for the house, joint tenancy agreements for his primary investment accounts, adding Valerie and Kayla as equal owners with full survivorship rights. The justification was typed in a memo line. Asset protection strategy for long-term medical liability. It was a lie. A stroke didn't threaten the house unless he had zero insurance, which I knew he didn't. This wasn't protection. It was extraction. She was stripping him for parts while he was still breathing. I pulled out my phone. I didn't scan them this time. That would take too long. I snapped high-resolution photos of every page, ensuring the signatures and dates were legible. Click, click, click. I uploaded them immediately to a secure folder named Recipes on my cloud drive. "It is okay, Dad," I said, putting the folder back exactly how I found it. "I saw them. I know." He squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a second. "Don't make her angry. Sloan, she gets so loud when she is angry." That evening, the house felt like a stage set for a play about a happy family that was about to be canceled. Valerie had cooked a roast chicken. The smell of rosemary and lemon filled the kitchen, warring with the tension that was so thick I could practically taste it on my tongue. We sat at the round table in the breakfast nook. Valerie was at the head, naturally. Kayla sat opposite me, scrolling through her phone with a detached, bored expression. She was 22 now, beautiful in a way that required high maintenance, her hair highlighted to the exact shade of expensive honey. "It is so good to have everyone under one roof," Valerie said, pouring herself a glass of Chardonnay. She was wearing an apron over her church clothes, playing the part of the exhausted but devoted matriarch. "Your father is resting well. I think he just needs peace. That is what the doctor said. Peace and quiet." "The doctor said he needs physical therapy and blood pressure medication," I said, cutting into a potato. "And he is worried about the papers he signed yesterday." Valerie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The smile didn't leave her face, but her eyes went flat. "He is confused. Sloan, the stroke affects the memory. I was just handling the administrative burden so he doesn't have to worry." "Transferring the deed to the house isn't administrative," I said. My voice was steady. I reached into my bag, which I had placed on the floor beside me. I pulled out the physical diary I had brought from Denver. It was a heavy, black notebook, the edges worn from years of handling. I placed it on the table. The thud it made silenced the room. "What is that?" Kayla asked, looking up from her screen for the first time. "It is a record," I said, keeping my eyes on Valerie. It is a log of every time you coerced him. Valerie, it has the dates you moved money from his retirement fund to your shell companies. It has the conversation you had with Pastor Miller about hiding assets in Kayla's name. I wrote it all down, every single day. Valerie put her fork down. She took a sip of wine. You are being dramatic. Sloane, just like when you were a girl, always writing your little stories, making yourself the victim. It is not a story, I said. It is evidence, and I have the financial documents to back it up. I saw what you made him sign today. Kayla groaned, dropping her phone on the table. Oh my God, can we not do this? Dad is sick, and you are starting drama about money? You are obsessed. Sloane, you are literally obsessed with trying to make Mom look bad. She is stealing from him. Kayla, I snapped, losing my cool for a fraction of a second. And she is using your name to do it. Do you know you own a shell company that paid for the church's new sound system? Enough! Valerie stood up, her chair scraped screeching against the tile floor. I will not have this poison at my table. You have always been jealous. You have always been a liar. Give me that book. No, I said. I put my hand over the diary. I said, give it to me. Valerie lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a burst of pure, panicked rage. She reached across the table, her fingernails scrabbling for the black cover. I stood up, grabbing the book and pulling it to my chest. Kayla, go upstairs, Valerie barked, moving around the table. I am not going anywhere, Kayla said, her eyes wide, looking between us like we were reality TV characters come to life. Valerie didn't wait. She came at me. We were two grown women in a suburban kitchen, but the dynamic instantly reverted to predator and prey. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the tender flesh of my bicep. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, her face inches from mine. I could smell the wine and the rosemary on her breath. I raised you. I kept this family together. You leached off us, I yelled back, trying to twist away. I have it all. Valerie, I have 18 years of it. She slapped me. It was a sharp, stinging blow across the cheekbone that made my ears ring. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the leg of the chair. Valerie used the momentum to shove me. She pushed hard, 2 hands against my chest. I flew backward, my hip connected with the sharp granite corner of the kitchen island. The pain was blinding. It radiated from my hip bone up to my ribs and down my leg. A white-hot flash that made me gasp. I crumpled to the floor, clutching the diary to my stomach. Valerie stood over me, breathing hard. Her hair was mussed, her face flushed a blotchy red. She looked down at me, and for a second, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew the book was dangerous. She snatched the diary from my hands. I was too stunned by the pain in my hip to hold on tight enough. No, I shouted, trying to scramble up. Valerie turned to the stove. The gas range was behind her. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy stainless steel skillet that was sitting on the burner, tossed it into the sink with a clang, and twisted the knob on the stove. Click, click, whoosh! The ring of blue fire sprang to life. Mom, stop! Kayla shouted, standing up now, looking truly terrified. What are you doing? Valerie didn't answer. She opened the book. She ripped a handful of pages out. The sound of the paper tearing was sickening, like skin being rent, and shoved them directly into the open flame. The paper caught instantly. Yellow and orange tongues of fire licked up the pages, curling the edges, turning my handwriting into black ash. Valerie, don't! I screamed. I pulled myself up using the counter, ignoring the throbbing in my hip. She threw the burning pages into the empty metal sink and shoved the rest of the book into the flame. The leather cover began to smoke and bubble. The smell of burning glue and paper filled the kitchen, acrid and choking. She dropped the entire burning mass into the sink and turned on the faucet for a split second, just enough to stop it from setting the curtains on fire, but not enough to save the ink. Then she turned the water off and let it smolder. A wet, black mess of pulp. She turned to face me. The fire was reflected in her eyes, making them look manic. "There," she panted, pointing a manicured finger at the sink. "It is gone. Your little lies. Your little fantasies." She stepped closer to me, invading my space again. I flinched, expecting another hit, but she just leaned in, her voice dropping to that terrifying whisper. "Without this, Sloane, no one will ever believe you. It is your word against mine. And everyone knows you are the unstable one. Everyone knows you have always hated me." I stood there, clutching the edge of the counter to keep myself upright. My hip was throbbing in time with my heartbeat. My face stung where she had slapped me. I looked at the sink, the diary, my companion, my witness, my history, was nothing but a pile of wet ash and charred leather. Kayla was standing by the fridge, her hand over her mouth. "Mom, you can't just burn things." "It was an accident," Valerie snapped, not looking at her. "We were arguing. Things got out of hand. Sloane dropped it near the stove. That is what happened. Right, Kayla?" Kayla looked at her mother, then at me. She saw the bruise forming on my face. She saw the smoke rising from the sink. And then, she looked down at her feet. I didn't see anything," Kayla mumbled. Valerie smiled. It was a victory smile. She looked back at me. "See? You are alone, Sloane. You have always been alone." I looked at the ruin in the sink. I felt a scream building in my throat. A primal cry of loss. That book was the only physical thing I had left of the last decade. But then, the scream died. Because as I watched Valerie gloat, as I watched her smooth her apron and compose her face back into the mask of the grieving wife, my brain rebooted. Lighthouse Nexus Labs, Protocol 7, Redundancy. She thought the data lived in the paper. She thought truth was something you could incinerate. She didn't know about the high-speed scanner in my apartment in Denver. She didn't know about the encrypted server in Iceland. She didn't know about the micro SD card hidden inside the hollow leg of the antique chair she had donated to the church last month. I forced tears into my eyes. I let my shoulders slump. I let out a sob that sounded broken and defeated. You burned it," I stammered, backing away toward the back door. "You destroyed everything." "I destroyed a lie," Valerie said, turning off the gas burner with a casual flick of her wrist. "Now get out of my house. Go back to your hotel. We will see you at the hospital tomorrow, and you will behave." I stumbled out the back door into the cool Ohio night. The air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the smoke-filled kitchen. I limped to my rental car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I leaned against the hood of the car, my breath coming in white clouds in the darkness. My hip hurt like hell. My face was throbbing. I was shaking, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. I looked back at the house. The kitchen light was warm and yellow, framing Valerie as she wiped down the counter, erasing the evidence of the struggle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the secure app. I typed a new entry. Date, November 12th. Time, 8:45 post-meridiem. Incident, physical assault, destruction of property. Subject, Valerie Mercer burned the physical decoy log. Subject, Kayla Mercer coerced into silence. Status, trap is set. I wiped the fake tears from my face. The pain in my body sharpened into something else. Focus. "You are right, Valerie," I whispered to the dark house. "You think I have nothing left." I opened the car door and got in. "Now watch me burn you down with nothing but air. Let me show you what real security looks like." I am back in my apartment in Denver now. The lights are off, save for the cool blue glow of my 3 monitors. On the center screen, there is a file directory. To the untrained eye, or even to a standard corporate IT audit, it looks incredibly boring. The parent folder is labeled LNL sysflash arch v4.2. Inside, there are subfolders with names like Legacy Driver Protocols and Cache Dump 2019. It looks like the kind of digital junk a tech company accumulates over a decade. The The stuff nobody deletes because they are afraid it might break some obscure line of code. But that is the trick. Security isn't about building a wall that nobody can climb. It is about building a door that nobody wants to open because it looks like a broom closet. I click on Legacy Driver Protocols. I enter a 64-character hash key. The screen flickers. The boring gray interface dissolves, and the real archive opens. It is all here. Valerie thought she was burning my history in that kitchen sink. She thought that by turning paper into ash, she was erasing the witness. But she forgot who I am. She forgot that I've been scanning every single page of that diary since I was 18 years old. Before I packed my bags for college, I spent 3 sleepless nights with a high-resolution handheld scanner. I digitized every handwritten entry, every red ink note, every tear stain. I tagged them with metadata. I type in a query, embezzlement. 243 results pop up. I type in coercion. 512 results. But the scans are just the foundation. The real weapon is what happened 4 days ago. I pull up a video file dated November 12th. 3 years ago. I gave my father a Christmas present. It was a top-of-the-line smart home security system, cameras at the front door, the back door, and inside the main living areas, including the kitchen. Valerie was thrilled. She loved the idea of being able to see who was at the door from her iPhone while she was getting a pedicure. She loved the status of having a smart home. What Valerie didn't know is that while I set up her user account with standard access, I retained root administrator privileges. And I didn't just set the cameras to record to the cloud service she pays $19 a month for. I set up a mirrored stream, a ghost feed. Every single pixel that those cameras capture is sent simultaneously to an encrypted server I rent in Zurich. I press play. On the screen, in high-definition 4K video, I watch the worst night of my life replay with clinical detachment. I see myself standing by the island. I see Valerie lunging. I see the slap, a blur of motion that snaps my head back. I see her shove me into the granite counter. And then, the audio, it is crystal clear. The microphone on that camera is designed to pick up glass breaking, so it has no trouble picking up Valerie's voice. Without this, Sloan, no one will ever believe you. It is your word against mine. I pause the video right there. Her face is illuminated by the blue flame of the gas burner. She looks deranged. She looks guilty. And most importantly, she looks exactly like the monster I have been trying to describe for 2 decades. She destroyed the paper, but in doing so, she created a digital felony, assault, destruction of property, witness intimidation. It is all there, time-stamped and backed up in 3 different countries. But I am not done. There is one more copy, the backup that isn't in the cloud. The backup that makes me smile every time I think about it because of the sheer, poetic irony of its location. I minimize the video window and open a photo file. It is a picture of the dining room set I grew up with. The heavy oak table, the long wooden bench, the 6 chairs with the intricate carving on the legs. Valerie hated that furniture. She said it was dated and heavy about 6 months ago. She finally convinced my father to buy a modern glass-top set that looks like it belongs in a dentist's office. Being the charitable saint she is, Valerie donated the old set to the Cedar Heights First Baptist Church. She bragged about it on Facebook. So happy to bless our church family with this beautiful dining set for the new fellowship hall. May it host many meals of grace. I zoom in on the photo, specifically on the leg of the chair that used to sit at the far end of the table, the one I used to sit in. Years ago, during a summer break from college, I took a drill to that chair. I bored a hole 3 inches deep into the thickest part of the leg, going in from the bottom up. I took a cylindrical, military-grade USB drive, waterproof, heat-resistant, encased in titanium, and I slid it inside. Then I plugged the hole with wood putty, sanded it down, and restained it to match the grain perfectly. Inside that drive is the black box. It contains the original scans of the diary. It contains the raw banking data I intercepted. It contains the audio recordings of my father's confused ramblings about money. Valerie thinks she gave away some old furniture. What she actually did was smuggle the smoking gun into her own sanctuary. That drive is sitting right now in the fellowship hall of the First Baptist Church. It is probably under a tablecloth. Maybe the ladies' auxiliary is drinking coffee around it. Maybe Pastor Miller is resting his foot on the rung of that chair while he discusses the charity fund with Valerie. The evidence is in the one place Valerie believes is untouchable. It is in the heart of her power, and when I decide to retrieve it, I won't need to break in. I will just walk in the front door during the next potluck. But not yet. A heist requires a team. I can't do this alone. I am a data architect, not a lawyer or a journalist. I need people who know how to weaponize the truth. I open my encrypted email client. I have 3 drafts ready to go. The first is to Marcus Thorne. He is a forensic financial attorney here in Denver. He is a shark in a $3,000 suit who specializes in recovering assets for victims of elder abuse. We met at a cybersecurity conference last year. I attach the folder labeled Financial Discrepancies Mercer Trust. I include the photos of the documents Valerie forced my father to sign in the hospital. I type, Marcus, you asked me once if I ever found a case that was too clean. Look at the shell companies. Look at the signature matching on the transfer deeds. This isn't just abuse. It is a structured dismantling of an estate. I have video of the perpetrator destroying evidence. Are you hungry? The second email is to Sarah Jenkins. She is an investigative reporter for a nonprofit news outlet in Ohio that focuses on corruption in religious organizations. I attach the folder labeled Church Fund Laundering Pattern. I type, Sarah, you have been looking for the link between the Cedar Heights charity expansion and the sudden property acquisitions in the county. Stop looking at the buyer. Look at the donor. I have a source inside the house. The source is me. The timeline goes back 15 years. The third email is the hardest one to write. It is to Mariah Price. Mariah is Valerie's niece, my cousin by marriage. She is the only other person who knows what it is like to live in Valerie's orbit. She left Cedar Heights 5 years ago, cut off all contact, and moved to Seattle to work as a barista. She was the one who whispered to me at a Thanksgiving dinner once, "You are not crazy. Sloan, she is evil." I attach a single file to her email. It is a PDF of the diary entry from the day Mariah left town, the day Valerie told the whole family that Mariah was on drugs, when in reality, Mariah had just refused to give Valerie a loan. I type, Mariah, I'm going to burn the house down. Not literally, but the reputation, the money, the lies. I have the receipts. I have the video. I need you to confirm the timeline for the years I was away. I need you to stand next to me when the story breaks. You don't have to be afraid of her anymore. I hit send on all 3. Then, I wait. It doesn't take long. Marcus calls within 20 minutes. Sloan, his voice is low, serious. I am looking at the hospital signatures. This is fraud. This is undue influence. And the video? Jesus, we can get a temporary restraining order and an asset freeze by Monday morning. But the shell companies, if what you are saying about the church is true, this is federal. This is wire fraud. Sarah replies an hour later. I am clearing my desk. This connects the dots on 3 other stories I have been trying to break. Can you prove the chair leg theory? I smile. I can walk you to it. Mariah calls me at midnight. She is crying. I thought I was the only one who remembered, she sobs. I thought I imagined it all. Sloan, the detail. You wrote down everything, even the thing about the blue dress she made me wear. I wrote it all, I say softly. And now we are going to make them read it. I hang up and turn my chair away from the screens. I look at my dining table, the one with the equal seats. I grab a large piece of sketch paper and a black marker. I start to draw. In the center of the page, I write, The event. Valerie is planning a massive gala next month. The Silver Jubilee of Service. It is going to be her coronation. The governor is supposed to be there. The local news will be broadcasting live. It is the moment she has been working toward for 20 years. I draw a line from the event to a box labeled The Church. then a line to the bank, then a line to Valerie, and finally, a line to Kayla. Valerie wants a spotlight? I am going to give her one. I am going to give her the brightest, harshest spotlight she has ever seen. I uncap the marker and circle the date of the gala. This isn't a revenge story anymore. It is a system purge. I am going to crash her network, and I'm going to do it while the whole world is watching. Okay, Valerie, I whispered to the empty room. You wanted to be the star. Let's see how you handle the close-up. The Cedar Heights Community Center, a renovated barn that sat directly behind the First Baptist Church, had been transformed into a shrine to Valerie Mercer. There were white lilies on every table, the kind that smell sweet until they start to smell like a funeral. A string quartet was playing soft, inoffensive classical music in the corner, and a banner spanning the width of the stage read, 2 decades of service, a night of gratitude. The air conditioner was working overtime, but it couldn't cut through the humidity of 300 bodies packed into the room. This was the social event of the season. The mayor was there. The entire church board was there. And thanks to the setup Kayla had bragged about for weeks, a local digital news crew was live streaming the event to the town's Facebook page. I arrived 20 minutes late. I walked in through the back double doors. The noise of the crowd dipped for a fraction of a second, a collective intake of breath. Before resuming, people whispered behind their hands. They looked at the bruise on my cheek, which I had made no attempt to cover with makeup. In fact, I had pulled my hair back into a severe bun to make sure it was the first thing they saw. Valerie was holding court near the stage. She looked magnificent in a shimmer of silver silk, a dress that probably cost more than my first car. She had her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of my father's wheelchair. Dad looked frail. They had dressed him in his best suit, but the collar hung loose around his neck. He looked less like a husband and more like a prop. Kayla was hovering nearby, snapping selfies with donors, her smile bright and practiced. I walked straight toward them. I didn't rush. I moved with the steady, inevitable pace of a glacier. "Sloan," Valerie said as I approached. Her voice was loud enough for the circle of admirers to hear, dripping with performative concern. "We were so worried. We didn't think you were coming after your episode the other night." She was setting the narrative. Sloan is unstable. Sloan had an episode. "I wouldn't miss it, Valerie," I said. "It is a night for the history books." I leaned down to kiss my father on the forehead. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy but alert. He gripped the armrest of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. He knew something was coming, even if he didn't know the specifics. Valerie leaned in to adjust my collar, bringing her face close to mine. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "Don't you dare," she whispered, the smile never leaving her lips. "If you make a scene, if you try to peddle your lies here, I will have security throw you out before you can get a word out. No one believes you. Don't stain this night." "I am just here to watch, Valerie," I whispered back. "Go get your award." I stepped back, retreating into the shadows near the sound booth. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. The screen showed a countdown timer. 0 hours, 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Pastor Miller took the stage. The room quieted down. He adjusted the microphone, beaming at the crowd. "Friends, neighbors, generous souls," he began, his voice booming. "We are gathered here to honor a woman who has been the backbone of this community, a woman who took a tragedy and turned it into a triumph, a woman who has managed our charitable funds with the wisdom of Solomon and the heart of a servant. Please join me in welcoming Valerie Mercer." Applause erupted. Valerie walked up the stairs, dabbing at a fake tear. She took her place at the podium. "Oh, stop," she laughed, waving a hand. "I only did what any mother, what any wife, would do." Behind her, there was a massive projection screen. It was displaying a slideshow of her life. Valerie at the soup kitchen. Valerie with orphans. Valerie holding an oversized check. I looked at my phone. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. I tapped the button labeled Execute Playlist Alpha. On the stage, the screen flickered. It wasn't a subtle glitch. It was a violent tear in the image. The photo of Valerie smiling at a charity gala distorted, the pixels bleeding into static. The audio system let out a high-pitched screech that made half the room cover their ears. Is there a technical problem?" Valerie asked, tapping the microphone, looking toward the sound booth. The tech guy was frantically hitting buttons on his console, shaking his head. Then, the static cleared. The screen went black. White text appeared, stark and simple, typed out letter by letter as if by a ghost. "When the truth is burned on a gas stove, the fire appears somewhere else." A murmur ran through the crowd. Valerie turned around, seeing the words for the first time. Her hand flew to her throat. "Turn it off," she hissed at the tech crew. "Cut the feed." But they couldn't. I had bypassed the local HDMI input 5 minutes ago. The signal was coming from a remote server in Switzerland. The text faded, and the video began. It was the kitchen. The angle was high and wide, capturing the entire room. The timestamp in the corner read November 12th, 8:42 p.m. The quality was 4K. Every person in the back row could see the expression on Valerie's face. They could see the way she lunged across the table. They could hear the slap, a sharp, cracking sound that echoed through the silent church hall like a gunshot. The crowd gasped. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the head of the choir, cover her mouth with both hands. On screen, Valerie shoved me. I hit the counter and fell. The audience watched as their saintly community leader grabbed a skillet, threw it in the sink, and lit the stove. The audio was the worst part. It was so clear. "Without this, Sloan, no one will ever believe you. It is your word against mine." Valerie stood frozen on stage. She looked small against the giant projection of her own rage. She was watching herself rip pages from my diary and shove them into the fire. "And everyone knows you are the unstable one." "This is fake," Valerie screamed, her voice cracking. She ran toward the side of the stage, toward the laptop sitting on the podium. "It is a deep fake. Someone stop this. Kayla, call the police." Kayla was standing by the buffet table, her phone in her hand, but she wasn't calling the police. She was staring at the screen, her face pale. She was watching herself on the video, standing by the fridge, doing nothing. Valerie reached the tech booth. "Unplug it," I said, "unplug it." "I can't, Mrs. Mercer," the kid at the board yelled. "It is not coming from my computer. The system is locked out." The video of the burning diary faded to black, but the show wasn't over. The screen shifted to a stark white background. A document appeared. It was a bank transfer record. A red laser pointer graphic, added by me in post-production, circled the date and the amount. October 15th. Transfer to River Valley Holdings, LLC. Amount, $50,000. Then, the screen split. On the right side, a property deed appeared. River Valley Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Valerie Mercer. Property address, 404 Oak Street. A gasp rippled through the room. 404. Oak Street wasn't a homeless shelter. It was a luxury vacation rental on the lake. Everyone knew that house. The slides began to cycle faster. Check 492. Payee, Hope Foundation. Amount, $12,000. Investigation, note. Hope Foundation is not a registered 501c3. Mailing address matches Valerie Mercer's P.O. Box. Hospital durable power of attorney. Signature analysis, forged. The room was in chaos. People were standing up. Donors who had written checks for thousands of dollars were pointing at the screen, shouting questions. Pastor Miller looked like he was going to vomit. He was slinking away from the podium, trying to put distance between himself and Valerie. Then came the final blow. The screen displayed a logo. It was a bold, black eye inside a circle. The logo of the Ohio Integrity Project, the most feared investigative journalism unit in the state. A headline appeared below it. The Saint of Cedar Heights, How a Local Charity Became a Private Piggy Bank. Part 1 of 5, releasing now. The MC, A local radio host who had been hired to keep the night moving, looked at his phone. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered into the microphone, his voice shaking. I have just received a notification. This isn't a prank. The Integrity Project just published the article. They have the receipts." The realization hit the room like a physical wave. This wasn't a family squabble. This wasn't a daughter acting out. This was a criminal indictment broadcasting live. Valerie was panting, her chest heaving. She looked wild. She grabbed the microphone stand, nearly knocking it over. "Lies!" she shrieked. The sound fed back through the speakers, a high-pitched squeal that made people wince. "She did this! Sloane did this! She is a computer witch! She doctored the video! You saw her drop the book! You saw it burn! The diary is gone! There is no proof!" She was pointing at me now. Her finger was shaking. "It is burned! It is ash! You can't prove anything because the book doesn't exist anymore." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the back of the room, where I was standing in the shadows. I slowly walked forward. I didn't need to shout. The acoustics of the barn carried sound perfectly. I walked past the stunned faces of the people who had ignored me for 20 years. I walked past the teachers who had told me to be quieter. I walked past the neighbors who had watched me walk home in the rain and never stopped to offer a ride. I stopped at the base of the stage. I looked up at Valerie. She looked like a cornered animal, sweating through her silk. I reached out and took the handheld microphone from the stunned MC. "You are right, Valerie," I said. My voice was calm, steady, conversational. "You burned the paper. I watched you do it. You did a thorough job." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I looked at my father. He was weeping, silent tears running down his cheeks. But he was nodding. He was finally seeing the monster. I looked back at Valerie. "But you made one mistake," I said. "You forgot that you don't live with a scared little girl anymore. You live with a data architect." I pointed to the screen behind her, where the video of her burning the book had started looping again on mute. "I scanned every page 3 years ago," I said. "I uploaded the audio files of you threatening Dad to a server in Zurich. I sent the bank records to the FBI this morning." I took a step closer, my voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and cold. "And you forgot the first rule of my job. I never, ever keep just one copy." Valerie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd, who were now holding up their phones, recording her, capturing her ruin from 300 different angles. "You thought fire would save you," I said. "But data doesn't burn." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Behind me, the double doors of the community center burst open. The blue and red lights of police cruisers washed over the room, cutting through the white lilies and the expensive silk. The show was over. The reckoning had begun. I did not stop at the microphone drop. That was theater. What came next was forensics. While the room was still reeling from the video of the burning diary, I walked over to the laptop connected to the projection system. The tech kid scrambled out of his chair, happy to surrender his station to someone who actually understood the architecture. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a secondary drive, a silver, encrypted thumb drive that looked innocent enough but held the lethal weight of unassailable mathematics. I plugged it in. The projection screen behind me shifted from the looping video to a stark black command line interface. "Valerie says I made this up in a few days," I said, my voice amplified through the speakers, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "She says I am using technology to lie. But here's the thing about digital files. They have fingerprints. They have DNA." I typed a command. A waterfall of text cascaded down the screen. It was a metadata log. "Look at the timestamps." I pointed to the scrolling numbers. Entry 402, created August 12th, 2012, last modified, never. Entry 815, created June 4th, 2014. These files weren't created last week. They have been sitting on a secure, immutable server for over a decade. You cannot forge 10 years of server logs without leaving a trace that any first-year computer science student could find. These are not memories. They are digital artifacts. Valerie was shaking her head, her face a mask of frantic denial. It is a trick. It is just code. She is confusing you with numbers. It is not a trick, Mrs. Mercer, a deep voice boomed from the back of the room. The crowd parted. A man in a charcoal gray suit walked down the center aisle. He looked out of place in the rustic barn, sharp and expensive, holding a leather briefcase like a shield. It was Marcus Thorne, the financial attorney I had emailed from Denver. He walked with the confidence of a man who charges $600 an hour. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the stage. My name is Marcus Thorne, he announced. I am legal counsel representing a consortium of private donors who have contributed over $150,000 to the Hope Foundation over the last 5 years. Based on the digital evidence provided by Ms. Mercer, which my firm has independently cross-referenced with public tax filings and bank records, we have reason to believe those funds were never used for charitable purposes. The air left the room. This wasn't a family drama anymore. This was a lawsuit. Marcus stopped at the foot of the stage and looked up at Pastor Miller. Reverend, I assume you are aware that using the United States Postal Service or interstate wire transfers to solicit funds for a fraudulent charity constitutes mail and wire fraud? Those are federal offenses. Each count carries a sentence of up to 20 years. Pastor Miller turned the color of ash. He looked at Valerie, then at the lawyer, and physically took 2 steps back, putting distance between himself and his star fundraiser. I was told the accounts were audited. The pastor stammered into his lapel mic, which was unfortunately still on. Valerie handled all the finances. The board just signed off on her recommendations. We trusted her. You trusted her? Valerie screeched, spinning on him. You were happy enough to take the new sound system. You were happy enough to take the renovation money. Don't you dare pretend you didn't know where it came from. So you admit it came from somewhere else? Marcus asked, his voice calm, trapping her instantly. Valerie froze, realizing she had just walked into a verbal snare. But the collapse didn't stop there. The screen behind me changed again, bringing up the documents I had photographed in the hospital, the transfer deeds, the shell companies, and right at the top, listed as the primary signatory for Mercer Family Holdings, was Kayla Marie Mercer. Kayla was staring at the screen. She looked at the signature, her signature, next to a clause assuming full liability for the debts of a company she had never visited. Mom, Kayla said, her voice small, trembling. What is that? It is just for tax purposes, honey, Valerie said, her voice shifting into that manic, soothing tone she used when we were children. It is to protect your future. I told you about this. You told me it was for a college trust fund, Kayla shouted. The sound was raw, unpolished, stripping away the pageant girl facade. You made me sign those papers the morning I had my wisdom teeth out. You said if I didn't sign them, Dad would lose his insurance. I was protecting us, Valerie yelled back. You used me, Kayla was crying now, mascara running down her face, ruining the perfect image she had curated for Instagram. I am the registered agent? Does that mean I go to jail? Does that mean I stole the money? You didn't steal anything, Miss Mercer, Marcus interjected smoothly. Provided you cooperate with the investigation and testify regarding the coercion. Kayla looked at her mother. The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. She took a step away from Valerie, moving toward the edge of the stage, toward the exit. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. She told me to just sign. She always says just sign. Then, a rustling sound came from the wheelchair. My father, Daniel, was trying to stand up. Dad, don't, I said, instinctively stepping forward, but he held up a hand to stop me. He didn't stand all the way up, but he pulled himself upright, gripping the podium for support. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the neighbors he had approved loans for, the friends he had barbecued with, the people who had watched him fade into a ghost of himself over the last decade. She told me, Daniel's voice was weak, but the microphone caught it. The room went deathly silent. She told me Sloane didn't want to come home. Valerie gasped. "Daniel, sit down. You are unwell." "She told me," he continued, louder this time, fighting through the slur of his stroke, "that Sloane hated us, that she was dangerous, but I heard her. I heard her in the kitchen the other night." He turned his head slowly, painfully, to look at his wife. "I heard you say that Sloane didn't belong in this house anymore. I heard you say we had to get rid of her to keep the money safe. I was awake. Valerie, I was awake." It was the final nail. The moral authority Valerie had wielded like a cudgel for 20 years shattered into dust. At the back of the room, the double doors opened wider. 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a Navy windbreaker marked State Financial Crimes Division entered. I had sent them the full dossier at the same time I emailed Marcus. They weren't here to arrest her for murder, but they were certainly here to secure the scene. "Valerie Mercer," the woman in the windbreaker called out, "we need you to step down from the stage. We have a warrant to secure the financial records of the Hope Foundation and the Mercer Family Trust." Valerie looked at the police. She looked at the pastor, who was looking at his shoes. She looked at Kayla, who was sobbing in the corner. She looked at her husband, who was refusing to meet her eyes. "This is ridiculous!" she screamed, her composure finally fracturing completely. "This is a witch hunt! That girl," she pointed a shaking finger at me, "she is doing this out of spite. She has always been jealous. She is making you all look like fools." But nobody was looking at me with suspicion anymore. A woman in the 3rd row stood up. It was Mrs. Gable, the owner of the local bakery. She threatened to have the health inspector shut me down if I didn't cater this event for free. Mrs. Gable said loudly, "She said she knew people at the county board. She told the school board my son was dealing drugs because he didn't date Kayla." A man in a plaid shirt shouted from the back. "He lost his scholarship because of her rumors. She skimmed off the top of the Tornado Relief Fund in 2015. Someone else yelled. It was a dam breaking. The fear that Valerie had cultivated, the fear of social ostracization, of her whispers, of her influence, evaporated the moment the truth was projected on a 10-foot screen. The diary entries I had displayed were just the key. The townspeople had been holding the rest of the evidence in their silence for years. Valerie looked around, her eyes darting frantically. She was losing the audience. She was losing control. And for a narcissist, that is a fate worse than prison. She turned to me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You wrote this," she spat at me. "You twisted everything. You are a liar. Sloane, a liar." I stood my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at the floor. I looked her right in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as a giant, but as a small, sad, vicious woman. "I didn't write the story. Valerie," I said into the microphone. "You did. You lived it. You chose it. Every time you stole, every time you lied, every time you pushed me into a corner, you were writing a page." I gestured to the screen, to the scrolling logs, to the undeniable proof of her life's work. "I just saved the file," I said, "and I saved it a lot more honestly than you ever lived it." The officer in the windbreaker stepped onto the stage. "Mrs. Mercer, please come with us. We have questions about the disposition of the church funds, and we need to execute a search of your residence." "You can't touch me. I am a pillar of this community," Valerie shrieked as the officer took her arm. It wasn't rough, but it was firm. A police hold. She was led down the stairs. The crowd parted, creating a wide berth, recoiling from her as if she were contagious. She kept shouting about lawyers, about ingratitude, about how she was the victim, right until the doors closed behind her. The silence that followed was heavy. Pastor Miller cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to regain control of the room, but nobody was listening to him. The spell was broken. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Marcus. "We have enough for the freeze order," he said quietly. "The assets will be locked by morning. Your father's house is safe." I nodded. I looked over at Dad. A nurse who had been in the audience was checking his pulse, but he was looking at me. He gave me a small, tired nod. It wasn't a full apology. That would take years, if it ever came. But it was an acknowledgement. He saw me. I looked at Kayla. She was sitting on a folding chair, her head in her hands, her phone lying on the floor. Her world had just ended, and she would have to learn how to build a new one, just like I did. I looked at the empty space on the stage where Valerie had stood. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel a surge of joy, a cinematic rush of victory, but I didn't. I just felt tired, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went back 15 years. I unplugged the USB drive from the laptop. I put it back in my pocket. My hand brushed against the rough fabric of my dress pants. I walked out the side door, away from the murmuring crowd, away from the police lights. I stepped into the cool night air. The crickets were chirping, indifferent to the destruction of the Mercer dynasty. I took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like incense or lilies or rosemary chicken. It smelled like dirt and rain. I didn't have to prove I wasn't crazy anymore. I didn't have to prove I existed. The log was closed. The backup was verified. For the first time in my life, I didn't have anything I needed to write down. The motel room smelled of lemon disinfectant and stale cigarette smoke, a scent that felt strangely grounding after the suffocating perfume of the community center. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap polyester spread scratching against my legs. Outside the window, a neon sign buzzed with a rhythmic electric hum, casting a flickering red light across the room every 3 seconds. It was the kind of place you go when you are in transit, when you are between lives. My laptop was open on the small round table, but the screen was dark. My phone, however, was lighting up the room like a strobe light. The messages were coming in waves. First, it was Mariah. Her text was short. "Thank you. I can finally breathe. I am crying in the break room at work. But for the first time, they are happy tears." Then came the messages from the town. People I hadn't spoken to since high school. People who had looked the other way when I wore clothes that didn't fit, or when I sat alone at lunch. "I'm so sorry. Sloan, we didn't know." Or the more self-serving ones. "I always knew something was off about her. You were so brave." I swiped them away. I didn't need their apologies. Their guilt was their own data to process, not mine. An email popped up from Marcus Thorne. It was stamped with the high-priority flag. Update. Temporary restraining order granted. All assets frozen as of midnight. The state attorney general has already reached out to my office. Get some sleep. Sloan, you won. I stared at the words. You won. It didn't feel like winning. Winning implies a game. This wasn't a game. It was a surgery. I had cut out the tumor, but the patient, my family, was still bleeding on the table. The phone rang. The screen displayed a single word. Dad. I let it ring 3 times. The red neon light washed over the phone, then faded to black, then washed over it again. I picked it up. "Hello?" I said. "Sloan." His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of the banker, or the husband, or the passive observer. It was the voice of an old man who had just woken up in a house that had burned down around him. "She is gone," he said. "The police took her to the county station. They said I might have to answer questions tomorrow." "You will," I said. "Just tell the truth. Dad, that is all you have to do." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the hum of the hospital machinery in the background. "I should have stopped her," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "When you were 12, when she took your mother's pictures down, when she made you stay in your room during the parties, I saw it. Sloan, I saw it, and I told myself it was just her way. I told myself I was keeping the peace." My throat tightened. This was the admission I had waited 15 years to hear, but now that it was here, it didn't fix the past. It didn't unburn the diary. It didn't give me back my childhood. "You let me be the shield," I said. My voice didn't shake. "You let her hit me so she wouldn't hit you." "I know," he whispered. "I am so sorry. I know sorry isn't enough. It isn't, I agreed. But it is data, and I can work with data. Are you coming to the hospital tomorrow? He asked. The fear in his voice was palpable. He was terrified of facing the wreckage alone. I will be there with the lawyer, I said. We will sort out the house. We will sort out the accounts. But Dad, listen to me. I am listening. I didn't do this to destroy the family, I said, looking at the red light painting my hands. I didn't do this to hurt you, or even to hurt Kayla. I did this because I was tired of being the villain in her story. I did it to stop being called a liar. I believe you, he said. I believe you. Sloan? I hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the cars rush by on the highway, people going places, people leaving things behind. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, brushed metal box. It was fireproof, waterproof, and crush-proof. Inside, nestled in foam, was a single micro SD card. This was the master key. This was the backup of all backups. It contained everything I had shown tonight, plus terabytes of data I hadn't used, audio files of arguments from 5 years ago, scans of rejection letters Valerie had hidden from me. It was a weapon of mass destruction, compressed into a piece of plastic the size of a fingernail. I held it up to the light. For years, this card had been my security blanket. I touched it to make sure I was sane. I touched it to remind myself that I had leverage. But the leverage had been used. The bomb had been detonated. I looked at the card, and then I looked at the empty space on the table. I didn't need to carry the weapon anymore. The war was over. The occupation was finished. I put the card back in the box and snapped the lid shut. I pushed it to the far corner of the table. I wouldn't destroy it. I am a security director. After all, we never delete the archives. But I would archive it. It was history now, not current events. I reached into my bag again and pulled out something else. A notebook. It was brand new. The cover was white, stark and clean. It smelled of fresh paper and glue. It didn't have columns. It didn't have dates pre-printed on the pages. I opened it to the first page. I picked up a pen. For the first time in 18 years, I didn't check the time. I didn't check the room for listeners. I didn't write down a list of grievances or a log of evidence. I wrote a single sentence. Today they cannot burn me anymore. It wasn't a record for a jury. It was a note for me. I closed the notebook and turned to the laptop. The camera light blinked on. I saw my own face on the screen. I looked tired. The bruise on my cheek was purple and yellow under the harsh room light. My hair was messy, but my eyes were clear. I hit record. If you have watched this far, I said, looking directly into the lens, then you know the story. You saw the fire. You saw the receipts. You saw the fall. I leaned in closer. But I want to tell you one last thing. This isn't a video about revenge. Revenge is exhausting. Revenge is just letting the ghost of the person who hurt you drive the car for a little while longer. I took a breath. This is a video about documentation, because there are people out there, maybe you are one of them, who are living in a house where reality is constantly being edited. You are being told you are crazy. You are being told you are too sensitive. You are being told that what you saw with your own eyes didn't happen. I tapped the table for emphasis. When someone tries to burn your story, remember this. Paper burns, servers can be wiped, but the structure you build in your head, the truth you hold on to, that is fireproof. So back up your life, back up your memories, use a journal, use a camera, use a friend, use your own stubborn refusal to be erased. Keep a copy of yourself safe, hidden away where they can't touch it. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that felt foreign on my face. Wait until the time is right, and then, when they hand you the match, don't be afraid to light it, because sometimes, the only way to build a new life is to burn down the lies that were holding up the old one. I reached for the mouse. My name is Sloan Mercer, and this is the end of the log. I stopped the recording. I closed the laptop. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of the motel room. The red neon light flickered one last time, then buzzed off for the night, leaving the room in a soft, gray darkness. I put my hand on the white notebook. I picked up the pen one last time and wrote a final line below the first one. From now on, the diary is not evidence against them. It is evidence that I am living. I looked out the window at the highway, a river of light flowing into the dark, leading anywhere I wanted to go. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and truth, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel and like this video. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please comment down below with your location and let's share our thoughts. And if you really want to support the channel so more people can hear stories like this, please hit that hype button, stay safe, and remember to keep your backups.